born and raised in Kilsyth, a coal camp in Fayette County, and I traveled to Shepherdstown, West Virginia to begin my college career to study art. I graduated actually from W.Va a few years later, and from there I became a freelance photographer, working largely in Washington, D.C. area, but was homesick, so I figured Charleston was a great place to come back to because it was a large enough city to support my efforts as a photographer. So that was how I came to be back in Charleston. Ultimately, I ended up in Minneapolis, unknowing that this is like the hub of human rights activities in our country. They have an annual Human Rights Day, and I decided to go to that with my portfolio, and I was just going to show it to anybody that would look. In the process of that, I was reading people's name tags, who you are and where you're from, and one of the ladies was Velma Corbell, who was the commissioner of the Department of Human Rights for the state of Minnesota, and she began to cry. And out of this mass of people in this huge auditorium, she just seemingly reached into the crowd and grabbed this other woman and pulled her over and said, "Look at this work." And this woman came and she looked at the work and she said, "How do you feel about Rwanda?" I said, "I feel terrible about Rwanda. We don't pay any attention to those people. We ignored them during the genocide and we're still ignoring them. I want to know what's happening over there." She said, "We do too. We're starting a program this summer and we'd like to do an assessment of what's happening in that country and how the genocides continue to affect them, and I think you'd be the perfect photographer for it. Would you be interested in going?" I said, "I'm packed now, let's go." I did see street children on the first trip, but I didn't have an opportunity to really connect with them or interact with them. In the first trip, I interviewed mostly survivors of the genocide. I did interview a few perpetrators of it, and I interviewed people who were part of this new movement of reconciliation in the country. It's growing every day. It was during the second trip to Rwanda last September, and I had made a short list of what I hoped to achieve during my time there. And one of the things on that list was to see more about what the lives were like for these children living on the streets. Because you have these children that 13 years ago watched their parents brutally murdered in their villages or in their homes or wherever, and they themselves somehow managed to escape and have lived completely on their own for all this time. Some of them, after watching their parents murdered, escaped into the jungle, somehow managed to survive at just a few years old, came back to the rubble of their homes, because during the genocide they didn't only just kill the families, they destroyed the homes, and these children would crawl back into the rubble of their homes and live there for years in piles of rubble because it was all they had and all they knew. But many children were left to the streets. I became very close with one particular group of boys living on the streets, and they ranged in age from about 7 to 17, and it was about a dozen of them, give or take. There were different days I would see all of them, and different days I would only see a few of them because they would move around looking for food and doing what they could. But at one point I connected with this church, and they had wanted to do something for these street kids, and they said they'd like to feed them, so I gave them money to buy food. And they agreed to cook this food and have just a big open meal for street children. So I invited these boys that I had been working with to come to this meal to have some food. And it was a really amazing experience, because here's these children who have never in their life held a plate of food, who have never in their life had a hot plate of food, who have never in their life had someone prepare a meal for them, and every bite they've ever taken, as long as they can remember, they've had to fight for it or dig it out of the garbage. And here they are with these plates of food, and before any one of those boys that I was working with, before any one of them would eat, they all offered their food to me first to share. And one boy was so insistent that he actually gave up that plate of food and handed it over to someone else to hold for him, and he snuck back through the line again and got another plate of food. And the boys all waited until I had food before they would eat. It's very disturbing to me that we use semantics as an excuse for inaction, and we mask our apathy as a nation with semantics. The reason why 1 million people died in 100 days in Rwanda, a place the size of our state of Maryland, is because the politicians globally were arguing over whether it was a civil war or whether it was a genocide. And we have to remember that during the genocide in Rwanda, there were several thousand UN peacekeeping forces in place, heavily armed with state-of-the-art weapons. The genocide was carried out by an untrained civilian militia using farm tools. Now, while the world argued over whether this was civil war or whether this was genocide, I mean, what would it have taken for 3,000 heavily armed, trained soldiers to hold off gangs of men with farm tools? I mean, we just totally neglected it. We totally turned our back on it, and we used this legalism of whether it's genocide or not as to whether or not we're going to save those lives. And we're doing the same thing in Darfur. The world is arguing over whether it's genocide or not, and what I've come to understand is it really doesn't matter what you call it. When you have thousands of people dying at the rates they're dying, it doesn't matter what we call it. It just matters what we do about it.